Yeah, the session is being recorded. We'd love for all of you to keep your videos on. Be on mute until unless you are required to speak. You can raise your hands as you speak. The idea is to make it as interactive and engaging as required. We are recording this session. The session recording will be shared with all the participants. There are CCUs that will be awarded. You need to stay on for beyond 90% of the session. This being a 90-minute session, we'll expect you are there at least till the 80th minute. Or in total 80 minutes, if your presence is recorded, you're getting the CCUs. In order to ensure that you get your CCUs, please ensure your name on Zoom is exactly as you would like it on your certificate, including capitalizations, including spellings, including whatever. It should be exactly as you want it on your CCU certificates. Yeah. With that, we jump right into our session. Very happy to have Subbu here. Subbu is an author of the book, The Millennials from the Penguin Random House. It's an amazing top charted book and explores the aspirations, motivations, and challenges of the raring to go generation. No guesses for no prizes for guessing why he's talking about coaching in a multi-generational workforce today. We hope to provide, and Subbu hopes to provide, an overview of what these generations bring to the table and how can coaches really support our clients during their significant life and career transitions, especially the ones who belong to this multi-generational workforce. A little bit about Subbu before I hand it over to him. He's a global leader of learner experience and advisor of talent development at DXC Technology. He enables learning for DXC, 130,000 employees, very small number. Prior to DXC, Subbu has had a variety of experiences in talent consulting in EY, Nonscape, etc. He has several decades of experience in talent management, leadership, organizational development, employer branding, employee engagement, org culture, and L&D. And he helps organizations build future skills, fosters employees' well-being, and enhanced organizational culture for performance. Subbu is an ICF credentialed coach. He's also a member of IAF, the International Association for Facilitators. He has founded and hosted the Culture Matters, a chart-topping podcast. And Subbu, we are great leaders. We'd love to be part of your podcast someday. And you can find a bunch of us here. And looking forward to the exciting session. People, you can raise your digital hand. Text chat is always available. Simply unmute and speak, and let's make this session engaging. Thank you. Over to you, Subbu.
Thank you so much, Shanti, for that lovely introduction. It's good to see some familiar faces and some people who I will get familiar with through this conversation. So thank you, everybody, for being here. It's a real pleasure to be here. Let me go ahead and share my screen without further ado. And please tell me once my screen is visible. Yes. Okay. So as Shanti mentioned, I do a bunch of things with my time, but what I really like to do is one of the things that I really like to do is research and writing. I wrote this book called The Millennials about 8 years ago now, and ever since I have been having these sessions on generations in general, and then specifically to coaching, to leadership development, to facilitation, etc., across various forums, even culture for that matter. I'm based in Bangalore, and I would love to. I know I've met quite a few of you here today, and like I said, familiar faces, but I'd love to also meet some of you in person, all of us in person at some point. The focus of today's conversation, and let me jump right into it, is that there are two interesting topics in hand, right? One is the fact that we have all of these different generations at the workplace, and the fact that we develop leaders, we coach leaders who belong to these different generations. And when these two come together, there is an interesting dynamic that emerges, as I'm sure all of us here on the call who are coaches can relate to fairly well, right? A lot of interesting dynamics emerge. What I plan to do through this session is introduce a set of ideas which will hopefully lead to some thinking and some questions and some discussions for us as we go along. And as Shanti mentioned, it's essentially 90 minutes. So the idea is to seed some thoughts for you to go back and look at some of these topics in a little more in detail. And I will try to do that through these 90 minutes. So that's my objective. And what I'm going to do is what you see on the screen. right? So I'm going to refer to the research that I did, and I have been updating that research over the last 8 years, because the millennials have all gotten old now, right? I'm a millennial. I'm already in my 40s, and you have the raring to go Gen Z now. You have Gen Alpha close on their heels. So there's a lot of interesting dynamic shifts that have happened in the last decade or so when it comes to the workplace. And of course, we had this big black swan event called the pandemic in the middle of it all, right? In the last decade, right in the middle of that. So a lot of interesting stuff have happened, and I'm sure all of that will add to the discussion today. And I'm going to refer to some additional, research, including I don't know if some of you read this book called Geeks and Geezers. I chanced upon it when I was doing my research about a decade ago, and it has some timeless ideas about how the young and old, the new, and the folks who have done it in the past, how they can coexist and work very well together. But more importantly, about how context matters, right? So we cannot isolate a generation and say that a generation is, A, B, C, without keeping in mind the context in which we are in. So that was one big takeaway. I will also refer to research from the Pew Research Center. I always go to the Pew Research Center for any generational research. Of course, there are many such think tanks all across, but the Pew Research Center is something that I keep going back to. The RPG group came up with a very interesting research report, I think about 6 months ago, called "Cracking the Gen Z Happiness Code," and I will also refer to that. We will, of course, look at some recent research by Claudia Goldin, who won the Nobel Prize in Economics last year. And for those of you who like binge watching TV shows, there is something from The Good Place that I will bring in also. So lots of interesting things packed into these next 80 odd minutes that we are going to be talking and discussing together. So without revealing more, let me just get in and let's start this conversation. So just a bit of background. As Shanti mentioned, when I did this research, it's been close to a decade now. I went and studied a whole bunch of organizations, right? So I went and spoke to the founders of many of these organizations that you see here, and put together a construct really about what is it that the millennials specifically want from the workplace, right? So that was the big question that I wanted to find answers to. And as I went in and did my research, I realized I came up with a lot more questions than answers, as it typically happens when you do any kind of research, right? So you tend to get into this rabbit hole and then figure out there are so many layers to it, right? So as you can see, small organizations, large organizations, some of these might be familiar to you, some of these might not be. Some of these organizations don't exist today. Some of these have actually morphed and pivoted into something else. So for instance, Social Cops has morphed into this startup called Atlin. It's one of the very well. If you've been following the startup space, it's been doing fairly well. Find was acquired by Reliance, for instance. Right now, Skip is still going strong. Um, some of these still exist. Jombe, Oyo, of course. TV doesn't exist anymore, right? So the founders have done something else. They have actually gone into gaming. Seek Sherpa has shut down, and it was the founders have got into BCG. So lots of things have happened since I did my research when I published the book. And as it usually happens in life, things move on. But what has happened is that there is a continuity in some of these stories, right? The founders have pivoted, leaders have evolved from what they were doing, and they have become many of the millennials have matured, right? So that has also happened. As I said, so this is basically a background to the research that I did, just so that you know where I'm coming from when it comes to sharing some of these ideas with you. But before we go ahead, I want to take a pause and share this with all of us, right? Because I think many of us also have this question about, hey, how do generations get defined? This comes from the Pew Research Center. So as you can see, there are several generations at the workplace. Many of them are on the verge of retirement, especially the silent generation and the boomers. But you have Gen X, the millennials, Gen Z, and now, as I said, Gen Alpha close to their heels, tapping on their heels. So that's a little bit of background about the different generations at the workplace, since this is the topic that we are dealing with. And as I did my research, there were lots of interesting philosophies about managing these different generations at the workplace. A couple that really caught my eye. One was Vineet Nair. He wrote this book called Employees First, Customers Second, many, many years ago. And he had written about Gen Y at that point in time. Very, there was foresight on Vineet Nair's part. And he said that the focus should be inverting the pyramid. If you've read the book, he talks about inverting the pyramid and saying that you should go to the front line and talk to the people who are actually doing the work for you to understand what's happening on the ground. So that was one. And Lori Goler, who this used to be Facebook, now called Meta, they've always focused on the millennial population. Right? It's always been in their radar, thanks to leadership philosophy, which marries some of the generational work with the strengths-based philosophy. They also look at strengths-based philosophy very closely. So with this, I wanted to kind of set this as the base for us, because we are going to be talking about generations. With this, I'm going to invite all of us to do a little bit of a kind of an experiential activity, right? If we may. So I have borrowed my organization's Slido account for this. I'm sure they won't mind. I'll invite all of you to go to slido.com, if you can, on your phone or on your laptop, whatever is convenient for you, and key in this this code 9708701, or you can just scan the QR code that you see on the screen, and it should take you to the Slido page. So let's do this quick exercise as we get started. I'll also check in the chat if you have any issues logging in. Please do let me know.
I don't know if I missed the brief. Are we to type a question now?
No, just hold on. Just log in, Sri. I have yet to start the poll. So there are a couple of polls coming away, and we'll see what emerges. So just log in to slido.com and enter the code, and just hold on for a second. I'm just waiting for everybody to get in. In case anybody is having trouble, please let me know. I can't see the chat for some reason. But please feel free to unmute yourself and let me know if you're having trouble.
I'll monitor the chat, Subbu. In case there's something, okay. I'll let you know.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so hoping everybody is able to log in. If yes, I will jump straight into the poll. So here is the first question. It's a cloud question, meaning think about the first thing that comes to your mind when you see this. In my experience, millennials are, what's a word or phrase that comes to your mind without thinking too much, and just key it in. Crazy, okay? Curious, driven, fast-paced, zany. Oh God. Privileged, I like that. Progressive, humans. Fantastic. Full of ideas. Interesting. Focused on career growth. Interesting. Energy driven. Versatile. Curious. Lots of curiosity coming in. Very interesting. Dreamy. Aware, evolved. Love life. Okay. Okay. Instant gratification. Impatient. Yeah, there you go. Now you're getting some of the masaledar stuff. Okay. Mostly positive, which is good. Restless. Okay, that's nice. Interesting. Greedy. Okay. Gold. I didn't see any lazy so far. Entitled. Yeah. Want work. Okay. Okay. Need appreciation. Risk takers. Okay, we have a couple more people typing in. Let's give it a minute more. Impatient is now coming up as one of the bigger words on this word cloud. Unambitious. Okay, we have both sides of the coin, ambitious and unambitious coming in. Okay, fantastic. So lots of ideas. Thanks for participating, everyone. Something in the chat. Okay. Fantastic. Thanks everyone for playing along. I think we have a kind of a slant towards impatient, curious, instant gratification driven, and a little bit of the entitled, little bit of the privileged, not so ambitious, right? So we have kind of both sides of the coin represented here, which is interesting. Okay, great. I'm not commenting on this just yet because there's one more question coming in. So I'm going to do that next. Here's the next question. However, right, what about the Gen Z? What, according to you, the Gen Z are, what first word or phrase that comes to your mind? Confused. Okay. Entitled, okay. Carefree, also impatient, futuristic, adventurous, distracted. Oh my God. Delusional. We have the words coming in quick and fast. Street smart, aware about choices. Digital babies, talented. Okay, interesting. Energetic, disconnected. Okay. Confused is coming up. Low attention span, bubble wrapped. Bubble trapped. Okay. Aggressive. Care about social issues. Negotiators. Okay. Visionless. Okay. Yeah, futuristic and visionless coming in. Distracted is coming up as a big bold word. You also see the chat. Saw something. Okay. Myopic. Purpose driven. Okay. Question everything. I think that's what you mean to say there. Question everything. Intelligent, sensitive, more awarded, informed, socially active. Okay, we did that already. Interesting, interesting. So there's a lot more of the confused and the lost and the distracted and the impatient coming in for the Gen Z. We saw a lot, a positive slant for the millennials, not so much for the Gen Z, which is interesting. Which is interesting. Okay, I think we've had a lot of people comment and share your views. Thank you everybody for playing along. That was indeed very interesting points of view coming in. Let me go back to, I have some of my work tabs also open, don't mind that. So let me go back. The reason we did that poll is that, and I have been doing this poll for every session I've ever run in the last 8 years, right? And there's a reason I do that, and I'm going to reveal that now. And I apologize in advance for revealing this later. I shouldn't have done this. I mean, I should have done this the other way around, but it's no fun if I do it the other way around. The insight really comes after, right? So I'm going to do this. I'm going to do the big reveal now about why we did that. So here is, again, going back to the Pew Research Center, right? The think tank that I was referring to. They've been doing a lot of research over the last, 50, 70 years on generations. And of course, in the US, but over time, they've also branched out to other countries in the world. And as I said, there are many such, there's also YouGov, I think, which is based out of the UK, that does a lot of interesting generational research also. And all of them, including the Pew Research Center, put this, the disclaimer that I'm going to put up on the screen in just a moment, they put it in bold these days. It wouldn't happen 10 years ago when I started doing my research. But then these days, they are very careful about publishing any kind of generational research. And they put this, this kind of caveat right up front, right, front and center, before they publish any of their research. And this is what it is. A typical generation spans 15 to 18 years. And there are critics of generational research, as I'm sure there are some in the call as well, who point out that there's great diversity of thought, even within generations, right? So you can't say that, it's fully homogeneous. So that's point number one. Point number two is that when we see that younger counterparts or adults have different views from their older counterparts, it may be driven by demographics, not really generations, right? So it's not necessarily because the fact that they belong to a generation that they are coming up with their views, because I mean, somebody who's young will probably see the world in a certain way, and you probably did that yourself when you were younger. So it probably doesn't have that much to do with a generation per se, right? So some of these research topics are extremely nuanced, and a lot of times we tend to mix up things, right? We think that this is a generational thing. It's probably just a demographic thing, right? It's not so much to do with the generation themselves. So this is the second big point, and the third is it's important for us to not standardize these labels, right? Especially when they're not appropriate, because a lot of times it can lead to reinforcing some stereotypes that we may be already be carrying about these generations. It doesn't matter if it's young or old, or so a lot of times it leads to oversimplifying people's complex lived experiences, right? So as I said, these disclaimers come up a lot more in research today, because of the fact that we tend to oversimplify, stereotype, because some of these could be biases that we are holding. It may or may not be true. It may be true for all that you know, but there is a chance that it may be something that we're assuming, and that is leading to us assuming that it's because of the generation, but it may well be because of the demographic. It has nothing to do with the generation. Right. And I want to kind of put this out there because it's so important, so extremely important for us, especially as coaches, to keep this in mind. Right. Otherwise, we will end up amplifying a lot of the biases that everybody carry, right? Including us as coaches, we may carry some of these as well. So the first question that's coming our way, and I know I've been talking for a while, what might the implications of this be for us as coaches? Please feel free to just unmute or drop it in the chat. Let's now hear from you. Yatish, yes, please.
Hey, so good to be in this session. Just wondering, when you use the word demographic, you usually refer to something generational, don't you? Right? When you say a demographic survey, you refer to generation. So what is the distinction here between demographic traits and not so much generational?
Yeah, so there is a slight nuance there, Yatish, in the sense that a demographic may or may not refer to a generation. A demographic can mean that these are younger folks vis-a-vis older folks, right? So it may not necessarily mean that it's millennials versus Gen Z versus Gen X. It can simply mean that you're talking about young and old, and not really millennials versus Gen Z, right? So if I can kind of qualify that with an example, so if I had done the same survey 10 years ago, would I find the same things, right? If yes, then it's probably a demographic output that I'm looking at, and not really a generational output, which has happened in the past, where researchers have asked the same set of questions, let's say 10 years apart, and they found the same responses, right? Somebody who was young, let's say in the 1990s, would have given the same responses to that same question versus somebody who was young today. So therefore, it's not really a generational thing. It has to do with the demographic, meaning the younger person versus the older person at that point in time. If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Jyoti?
Yeah, when I was looking at the word demographic, I actually had a few more angles. Rural versus urban, tier one, tier two
Yeah.
cities. What's the kind of environment you've been raised with? Income, because it's simple. Somebody who's got an access to a mobile and internet at the age of 5 versus somebody who's got access to it at the age of 15.
Right.
So those again come along, and I really like the fact that you talked about, because this is something that I had been talking in my organization. Many folks just say, these young people, or these millennials, and we always say that, look, when you have a set of, I'm just using this word of management trainees joining an organization. So
Right.
if you look back to when we came in, we were all excited with lots of ideas. So it's nothing new. It's the newness, and just that after that you get settled, or you just get used to the place or the culture, you get absorbed. But you can't let go of that aspect, because that's natural to happen, rather than either pushing it, saying because you are new generation kind of thing. It is just that at that age everybody goes through that. It is that we forget that we went through that stage many a times.
Sure,
Yeah, that's
sure.
all I wanted to share. Thanks.
Sure. Thanks, Jyoti. Yeah, and to kind of amplify what you were saying, I think demographic has a lot to do with, for example, socioeconomic background, or like you said, right, where do I come from? Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 cities. And it has, and some of those, if I can call it intersectionalities, also tend to matter, right? So women, for example, who come from Tier 2 cities, if you look at that, right, and young or old, and that in itself becomes a very interesting trait. And we will talk about some of that as well. But that's a great point that you made, Jyoti. Goldie, yes, please.
Hi. Well, firstly, thank you for giving us this amazing talk, Subramaniam. I want to just take on the thread that has been, implied for the last two people who've spoken. I actually coach Gen Z, and I've got some clients who have moved on from, their life in school, and so much so that one of my clients is now actually interviewing for his first job. So it's very important that although he belongs to Gen Z and has been ever since I have coached him, it's interesting to see the growth that the client has had, and so that kind of backs up your disclaimer that you've portrayed here on the slide. And I think that's really, really important in coaching. In my case, I've been fortunate enough to have seen that growth and that person be my client. But overall, it's really important to put the context as well, and coming back to what you said earlier, and see where the person is at in their life, because they may be millennial, Gen Z, Gen X even, but they could be overlapping over generations as well in the way they think.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Goldie. And as you said, I think the evolution also matters because you're coaching the individual, right? And everybody has their own stories and backgrounds and experiences. So while it's important to keep the demographics and also the generations in mind, it's also equally important to focus on that story as a coach at that point in time. I think that's also very critical, so that you can be with the evolution of the person that you just mentioned. You can be there with them to take them along, right? I think that's a great point. Thanks, Goldie. Yes, Meenakshi. Thank you. Yeah, we are, I mean, because I also do this podcast called Culture Matters, I was speaking to this professor from New York University, and he mentions, he researches a lot. His name is Jay Van Bavel. He's a professor of social psychology at NYU. And he talks about how we have his focus of research is, and because Meenakshi brought up that point, the focus of his research is identities, right? The kind of social identities that we carry. And it's usually multitudes. It's never just one thing. We have multitudes within us. And how do we as coaches kind of, unravel those multitudes and help our people make the most sense of who they are? I think that's also a critical point to make here, because it is that intersectionality that comes into play the moment we talk about identities. And of course, the generational identities is one part of it, not discounting that. But there are so many other parts to the identity as well. I'm also going through the chat. Please also feel free to unmute yourself and speak if you have any other points. Attention spans are minimal. Yes, Vikram. Yes, please. Go ahead.
Subramaniam, I wanted to share this, Meenakshi.
Hi,
I wanted to also, hi. I wanted to add to that point on intersectionality. So in my own lived experience, born and raised in India, now I've been in the US for the last 16 years. Aspects of my identity that put me in a place of privilege in India are a point of disadvantage in the US. So, and vice versa. So it's not just our own identity, it's also our environment.
Yeah.
So, for example, the fact that I'm not as dark as people expect, dark skinned as people expect for a South Indian to be. So based on skin color, it can be a point of privilege in India, depending on where you are. But it doesn't matter in the US. I'm brown skinned. So it is a point of disadvantage. Same thing with my accent of English was treated as a point of privilege in India.
Right.
But in the US, I still have an accent, so it doesn't matter. So the point I wanted to bring out, and for us as coaches, I think taking into account the system in which the client exists and how their individual intersectionality engages with their system, because that's what creates their experience in the moment or in whatever situation they are in.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Couldn't have said it better. Thank you, Meenakshi.
Thank you. Absolutely. Thank you.
In fact, I will bring in the point about context just after this, right? So thanks for bringing that up. That's actually my next point, but I'm also checking if there are any other comments in the chat. Yes, Vikram, I think that's a great point about attention spans. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. I think, Vijay, the point that you're making is that, these have been going on for generations, right? It's not new. So it has probably very little to do with the generation and a lot more to do with being young, right? Or being old. So it has. So we need to kind of be able to distinguish that. I think that's the tricky part, right? So how do we really distinguish what's happening here? Is it because of the context married with the fact that somebody is young or old, which can be true, right? So for example, the fact that attention spans are low, it's true for everybody, but then maybe it's slightly, is it more true for some generations versus the other, is a question that we need to ask. And some of that can be, through research and data, we can get that and we can use that, right? But we need to be sure about the fact that, some of it is indeed true in the context that we are coaching. And I keep going back to coaching because that's the background to what we are all doing here today. Okay, thanks everybody for playing along. I'm hoping there are no more comments or questions on that. Thanks for adding on your views, everybody. So I've also put in a slide about what some of this can mean for us as coaches and for the coaching process. Of course, it's very easy to stereotype and generalize. So we need to be a little careful, right, about not oversimplifying some of this and honoring each individual's context, like Goldie and Meenakshi were both alluding to. The demographic traits, I think this is the point that Yatish was also making. So the demographic traits like, socioeconomic status, education level, cultural background, these don't really have anything to do with the generation per se, not all the time. Sometimes they may do, but sometimes they don't, right? So therefore, we need to ask ourselves, is it because of truly the generation or is it because of something else, right? Whatever is emerging through that coaching conversation. And this, I think, as coaches, we have this huge opportunity to bridge gaps and facilitate collaboration between different generations, right? Because we have that opportunity, especially if you are coaching multiple leaders within the same cohort. I think there's a huge opportunity for us. And how do we do that? How do we bring people together from the different generations through that process? And how do we facilitate that, right? Even small nudges are great. Important to address our own biases. This is a continuous work in progress for all of us, as I'm sure we understand that. And therefore, it's important that we continue to work upon ourselves. This next point I really like, right, which is that we all go through a mentoring process, a coach mentor who's assigned to us. It's not a one-time process. We don't have to do it only during certification process. For example, at any point in time, if we can look at mentors who belong to different generations, I think it's hugely beneficial, right? And I don't mean just older ones or younger ones, but cross-reference, have a group of mentors who probably belong to different generations from you. I think that will be hugely advantageous for you as a coach, right? To be able to get those additional points of view. And of course, as I said, staying curious, looking for relevant research and keeping up to date, right? So that, because as I said, a lot of this research continues to evolve, and it's important that we keep in touch with what's happening and what's really relevant. Now, this is the point I think that Meenakshi was making, which I'm coming to next, which is the significance of era, right? The context that you're in. And this is from the book Geeks and Geezers that I was referring to earlier. And I absolutely love this framework, which I'm going to show you in just a moment, which is that, we live in this digital era. I think someone also put it in the chat, or in one of the, the millennials versus Gen Z, the word cloud. Earlier, we used to, many of us, at least I wasn't born fully into an analog world. I was born when the world was shifting to digital. So I've seen the analog in part and then, kind of morphed into digital, whereas a lot of younger folks today have been fully immersed in digital, right? They don't know a world where analog used to exist. So an analog world used to be linear, right? There were lots of maps to guide you from point A to point B. And I don't mean literal maps, but maps for you to make decisions in life, to make a lot of those ways in which you work, for example, or choose for families, etc. Very mechanical. There was a command, order, predict, control kind of a leadership spiel to pretty much everything. Experience was hugely important, and it continues to be. And specialists were revered. So a lot of importance given to specialists, and it still continues to happen to a large extent. But what has also happened is this digital world has kind of gotten superimposed into the linear era, right? And it's not like we are in a fully digital world, but it's got superimposed, right? So therefore, there's a lot of non-linearity that happens. And today, it's not just about maps. You need to have a general compass about where you're going, general direction. And then, if the compass moves, or if you need to move along the compass, you need to shift direction as well, right? Today's order of things is that you don't have mechanical systems, you have living systems. You have, I'm going, for example, in my current organization, I'm going through a change management exercise, org restructuring, and it happens more often than it used to before. So therefore, you need to align, you need to be able to quickly change, right, shift and make those changes. And you need to be able to empower your people. It's not just about controlling and, command and control. You need to be able to align, create, and empower your people. And the beginner's mind is therefore far more important, right? And I'm sure all of us as coaches have this big smile on our face when I say this, which is that if you're able to ask the right kind of questions, you're probably better able to shift and navigate this world. And I think coaching empowers all of us to do that. And this last point, which is that specialists are of course important, but if you can ask the right kind of questions, you are a deep generalist, right? So you're wading into things that you don't know, and through that process, you're building awareness, you're building your own knowledge through that process. So this is the era that we live in. And again, I'm just going back and re-emphasizing the point that we were making, that Meenakshi and others were making earlier, which is the context matters, right? So we absolutely need to understand where we are at, and in that context, we need to apply our learning in terms of demographics, generations, what have you. It's a bit of a tongue-in-cheek kind of quote, which says that this person knows everything, all he lacks is an experience, right? Which goes back to the beginner's mind, the empty vessel, which is so important for all of us to have, especially in this digital era. As I said, this is from Geeks and Geezers, and this book is old. It's not new, right? It's at least about 30 to, I think, 40 years old, and it's still so relevant, right, in today's day and age. So I chanced upon this book through a mentor of mine, and I absolutely love this framework, which I try and share every time I can. Yeah, thanks. Every time I can. Okay, so this, I think, is the point that I was making about the context and why it's important for us to keep that in mind. And very quickly, I'm going to just go through this very, very quickly. And in the research that I did from my own book about 8-10 years ago, I looked at these 7 lenses about through which millennials specifically view the workplace, and what is it that the millennial generations want. I used to get this very funny question about, hey, you're a millennial and you're writing a book about millennials, which I find very odd, because let's say if a woman leader is writing a book about women leadership, nobody questions that. Like, oh, you're a woman, you're writing about. Obviously, I am, because I'm a woman. I understand the context better. So, which is not the case with generations. If you think about it, we tend to, kind of place this in our minds very differently, very loosely, I think. So anyway, so that was just an observation offhand remark, not very important. But as I said, coming back, 7 lenses through which, I looked at this subject, which is leadership, motivation, culture, innovation, digital teaming, and learning. And the questions that I asked was that there seemed to be these apparent contradictions at the workplace. And this was many years ago. I think many of these still hold true even today, which is that there is this tug of intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. Culture, right? So am I working in a culture which feels authentic to me versus what is being said is not really what's being done? So I think is also true to a far extent today. Is the organization and the team that I'm working for, do they embrace innovation, right? Do they fuel my curiosity? Many of you used curious for, the word curious for millennials. That came up a lot in the research that I did, versus being in a, straight jacketed role where I need to accept conformity. Digital was huge. When I was writing this, it was huge. Today, it's become BAU. It's everywhere, right? So there was a lot of digital disruption happening. Today, it's all about AI, right? Teaming versus riding solo, I think, also is very, very critical, and it continues to be critical, because again, we work in different kinds of contexts, and this this aspect of, do I work in a team versus do I ride solo, right? Do I work in a gig kind of a setup, or am I in a formal role with a team? And there's a lot of interesting stuff happening there as well. Just yesterday, I was reading up about how Naval Ravikant says that all of us at some point will become entrepreneurs, right? And that will happen in the next 50 years, because a lot of the transformation that's happening around us is empowering entrepreneurs, and we'll continue to work in smaller teams versus huge teams. Anyway, that aside, because we were talking about teaming versus riding solo. Continuous learning, I think all of us on this call are here because we believe in continuous learning. And then the last point, which is that a lot of the millennials, when I was writing the book, were going through this transition of managing self versus leading others. Many of them today have become leaders in their own right. But that wasn't the case about 8 to 10 years ago, right? So how were they looking at that transition was something that I was curious about. And that was something that I went in to talk about, right? So again, I want to leave you with this, because these, as I said, many of these contradictions still exist, and they have morphed. They may not be the same as it was probably about 8 to 10 years ago, but there have been layers of context that have gotten added over the last 8 to 10 years or so, right? Yeah. I'm also looking at Goldie's comment about how many of us find ourselves in that tug of war. Absolutely, context matters. Thank you, Goldie. Sorry, I'm just recovering from a viral, so you'll have to excuse me. Now, as I said, a lot of the research that I had done from my book is slightly dated. And this report, and you can look for it online, if some of you may have already seen this. It got my antenna up because the RPG group, I've never seen a business house go in and commission research, and this was serious research that they did. Because the fact that the RPG group has this happiness framework, and they also believe in looking after their people, especially from a generational lens. So they went and commissioned a research report with this company called Yuva. You may have heard of them. Very popular on Instagram, etc. They do a lot of interesting stuff. They also have an in-house research team. So the RPG group went and commissioned Yuva to do a study about what is it that Gen Z really wants. Right? And this happened I think it was last year, about 6 to 8 months ago, in November of last year, if I remember correctly. And some interesting trends emerged, right? And you will see a lot of those trends in context to today. At least I was able to relate to a lot of them, but I'm going to share what some of those findings were. But before I do that, this is what they wanted to do. They wanted to get an understanding of what Gen Z wants. And they went outside of the company. They didn't poll people within RPG group. They said, let's go out. Let's go and talk to people in the wild, and let's see what people really want, right? Especially the Gen Z cohort. So these were some of the things that they wanted to understand: personal relationships, society, environment, and probably of interest to us, which is workplace, right? So what is it that what does happiness constitute in the minds of Gen Z when it comes to the workplace? Fairly decent sample, I would say. So they looked at close to about 2,500 people through the quantitative analysis, and plus an additional 4,000 people for the qualitative inputs, right? And as you can see, they looked at both metro and non-metro. So there was a good spread of, not just your tier 1 cities, but inputs from, different kinds of cities across the country. And yeah, you can look it up. You can search for the RPG tracking the Gen Z code, and you will find this whole report available for free online. You can download it and read through it. Two things I want to highlight, which really stuck with me. The first thing is this point about toxicity, right? And there was a huge spread within the report about why this has become such an important thing, and what are some of the causes from a generational lens, which is again interesting. So this is when they polled Gen Z, they said that these are the things that they're not very happy about, right? So hierarchical impositions, crossing boundaries, not so much privacy, constant monitoring, discrimination based on different aspects, as you can see here, work politics, right? corporate greed over sustainability. Sustainability was a big point, continues to be exercising privilege, too much wastage, etc. And also a few other things. This mental well-being comes up a lot in this research as you go through it, right? Calling it new age drama. Right? So it's just excuses, not really, some of that. Instability, lack of emotional support, no redressal, ridiculing and labeling, right, causes of environmentalism, etc. Whatever, right? So some of what we were talking about earlier that came up in the research as well, which I thought was very interesting, right? So this was one point, right, which kind of stuck with me, and yeah. And also the other, sorry, I'm just looking at the chat again. And also the other point, which is that what is it that they want out of the workplace? Right? What do the Gen Z want? Again, this was through a poll. The basics like growth opportunities, salary incentives, work-life balance, L&D, job security, all of these are important. But in addition to that, there were a couple of other questions which derived some questions, answers to questions such as, what are some must-haves, right? What should you have at the workplace? And you see some of the contextual elements coming up here, which is flexi work, mental health, right? Those are the top two. Personalized workplace, no dress code. You see all of that, the other stuff of growth and opportunity are really basics. I mean, that has to be there. But then on top of that, you need to have some of these other things as well. So therefore, expectations are increasing, right? Menstrual leaves, for instance, amazing to see some of that. Gender neutral washrooms, you can see that there's a lot more awareness about some of these things. Crying and meditation rooms, right? Food, of course, I think that comes up a lot. But a lot more awareness about, some of these issues which probably didn't get talked about some years ago. And ideal, if you were to have an ideal workplace, what would you like to have in that workplace? And again, you see some, points like mental health, fairness, work-life balance, flexible work. So a lot of this, again, the interesting part is that when I look back to the research that I had done and, through the years, I had also done a lot of primary research and I had gone, to people surveying, doing the focus groups, etc. A lot of this did not exist before, right? The millennials, as many of you also said in the word cloud, it was all about curiosity, getting it done, drive, being an entrepreneur. Things are changing slightly, right? And it's very apparent in the data. A lot more work-life balance, understanding that they don't want to be burnt out, at least Gen Z, right? So a lot more awareness about some of these sensitive issues, which did not get spoken about as openly as 10 years ago when I was, doing that kind of research, which I find very fascinating. Right? Which again, when the report came out about 6-8 months ago, it kind of struck my eye. Any questions or comments on this? I'll just take a pause. I know I've been talking again for a while. Any questions or any comments? I think Goldie has a question. Yeah, want to be listened a lot more. Absolutely. Yes, Shelly. Crying and meditation rooms. Oh, I didn't see Meenakshi's point. Teamwork, yeah. Yes, absolutely. Yes, I think Shanti, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of correlation with the demographics that you were talking about. Are the needs changing? Yes, and I also believe a lot of demographics is also contributing to that change. When we were growing up, telephone itself was something to be treasured, kept under lock and key. Now a child of 12 has his or her own smartphone. So I think the environment is also encouraging a lot of need that we see here.
Absolutely. 100% agree. It is a combination. So, for instance, growth opportunities, salary incentives, having the learning and development, right? I think these are kind of universal needs that will continue to be there. But some things which are contextual, as you mentioned, are getting overlaid on top of this, right? Which is great. I think it's amazing that there is awareness about some of these things. be their mirror research looks at what they want and not what they want to commit to. Interesting. Thanks, Kalyan, for that. Any other comments or questions? Yes, Jyoti.
Yeah, I was just surprised to see the aspect of purpose missing somewhere in terms of
Personalized
uh,
workplace.
yeah, personalized workplace, or from an organization, what do we want to achieve? Because at least when I was interacting with some the people who are at the cusp between Gen Z and millennials, there are a lot of questions that came to me, at least as a manager, in terms of why we are trying to do what we want to do, what's the purpose that we want to achieve,
Yeah.
what are we going to, how are we going to impact. So some of these elements came very strongly, especially when you talk to the new generation. I don't know whether that is maybe my experience, but I just was surprised that it didn't seem to come across.
Yeah, absolutely.
In fact, it is there. I saw that in the ideal working rank, workplace ranking of the first one, pursuing
Which point, Vibhu?
the purpose.
The purpose. Yeah. The purpose does come, actually, you're right. And I haven't called it out very clearly here because it was in one of the, it was there in one of the points that came up. What is interesting is these additional things, as I was saying, which is over and above, what you tend to see. In fact, the purpose point came up very, very strongly when I was doing my millennial research. Autonomy, mastery, and purpose. The trifecta of intrinsic motivation was very, very strong. Right, and of course that continues. It's not like that's not there, but the superimposition of other things along with that, I think, is also the interesting part. Yes, Goldie.
Not to sound controversial or anything, but I'm looking at all the must-haves in the working place ranking, and they have a very strong commonality with one thing which is not spoken about, is the overload of technology that Gen Z have been exposed to compared to even millennials, I would say. And for me personally, this is the bigger problem. If they want rooms to cry and meditate, I think that has a lot of link with how much exposure do you have to your device per day. And this, I think, is just another sort of tip of the iceberg, which I think is very up and coming. And I don't know if you're familiar with Jonathan Haidt's work.
Yes,
a great
the
book
Anxious Generation,
a few months ago. Yeah. So, and that's precisely Gen Z, isn't it? They were all born sort of 2005 onwards. Sorry, but earlier. So I think that's something that needs to be looked at.
Yes, absolutely. Oh, yeah, 100% right. And he has rung the alarm bells, Jonathan Haidt, saying that around 2010 is when, I don't have that graph here, but there's a very interesting graph from the professor in San Diego University, I forget her name, which it's like a hockey stick curve in terms of anxiety going up, especially in the last 10 years. And you see that very pronounced among the Gen Z, right? In fact, adolescent girls, right? That's where the highest anxiety problems are. And Jonathan Haidt, of course, also talks about it in his book. Shivanand, yes, you have a question.
Oh, thanks, Subbu. It's kind of observation. So I've observed that Gen Z is looking for more. I mean, mental health is the priority, and then they are looking for mental health resources, actually, right? So I was a part of organization, so where I think we had many mental health resources. But interestingly, so Gen Z was not interested to go and then figure it out what helps them, right? But then I'm just kind of curious to know, Subbu, what is that the organizations are trying to address that particular thing, right, when it comes to mental health?
Sure, and I'll invite others also to add on to this. I feel that not enough is being done, and that's my personal view. Not just my personal view, my view from talking to psychotherapists, from people who do deep work around this, and not just coaches, which is that there is very little awareness about what some of these underlying issues are. The Jonathan Haidt research that Goldie was just talking about, there's very little awareness among managers and leaders that some of this is actually happening underneath. And it could be leading to burnout, disengagement, not feeling connected with the purpose of the organization, etc. So I think there's a lot more that can be done. Is what my view is, and I'm sure others can also add on. People will have their own experiences to share, but that's just my point of view.
Okay, thank you.
Can I?
Yes, please, Vishy.
Yeah, no, I was kind of wondering, like my background, I was a co-founder of the counseling initiative at Wipro way back in 2002.
Okay.
And counsel a lot of people with younger generation. And after that, I was into coaching. Yeah, and I am also father of two teenage sons, no? One 19 and the second one is 17. So I was kind of wondering, are we kind of typecasting and pigeonholing people based on their age? Because I've seen that age is a factor, but I've seen people in a younger age have more depth and more maturity and more appreciation of the world in general and more open. At the same time, even in corporates, people are in that upper echelons, right? There still you can put it as a Gen Z kind of a group. What I'm trying to say is, are we getting into too pigeonholing? That's the question that I had in mind, because everybody is kind of unique and
yes,
it is important to meet them where they are, right?
100%. Yeah. And that's why the big disclaimer before we even started the conversation, right, Vishy, which is that I use stereotyping and typecasting instead of really understanding what the issue is for that group, for that, for that person. I think it's also very critical. And as you said, there could be a lot of unlayering that can happen through that process, especially again, going back to the fact that especially from a coaching process, there's a lot more that can be done while we work with some of those people one-to-one as well. Now, 100% agree with you.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think there were two people who had raised their hand before I forget. Jyoti and Barinder, whoever wants to go first.
Yeah, so since I'm unmuted, I'll just finish. I just could see a trend in terms of the must-have workplace. It seems to be an underlying aspect about support and trust. So if I'm looking at work-life flexible aspects, dress code, etc., it's all about, trust me, right? Trust us, or, to do the right thing. Don't be like superimposing on things because we're sensible. And the other was support, like office transport, health. The others, 30%, 34 are things that could be lesser in terms of priority, but the themes that I could just get through was more around trust and support broadly. So I just thought I'd share what I could just see.
No, absolutely. I think anecdotally also, I've spoken to leaders, let's say in IT, I work in an IT organization myself. So there is a lot of questioning and, the trust part of it, like you said, even with aspects with remote working versus coming back to office, for example, right? Do I trust my people enough to work from home, or do I need to constantly be monitoring them? And you saw monitoring as one of the things in the previous slide, right? So some of that also comes up as feedback through the data, which is that and to your point, right, I think that's a good extrapolation of trust, right? Do you trust your people to do the right thing, or do they need to be constantly monitored and tracked? That's a great point. Yes, Barinder, you have a point.
Yeah. So adding to this point regarding mental health, I fully support your point that very little is being done in this case, and it is seriously required. I was reading this UN happiness report a couple of months ago, and there was very interesting. Though India ranks very low on the happiness index, but they have a special section on senior citizens in India, where they rank very high on the happiness index across the world.
I see.
So one of the things which they pointed out, maybe senior citizens are more linked to the spirituality, which is much prevalent in India. So that is one of the reasons written. So maybe if you can align this RPG report and with the UNS happiness, where they have special section for India this time.
Right. I haven't yet seen it fully, I have to be honest, but that's a very interesting point. Thanks for sharing.
And because it links with the mental health point, which because senior citizens means a generation before me also.
Sure.
My parents. I am 72 born, so it will be before me. if they overall survey says they are much happier than the world over, that needs to be studied as compared to the overall low happiness index in India.
Yeah, that's very pertinent point, Barinder. Thanks for sharing that. There's probably a lot more that can be uncovered from that. But what is it about that spirituality that gives people, that contentment and happiness, and can we extrapolate that? Right, I think that's a great
That
point.
report is also available on UN website.
Sure,
It can be downloaded.
Feel free to drop it in the chat. I'm sure people can access it.
I'll see if I can find out the link. I'll drop in the chat.
Thanks. Thank you. Okay, we have a couple of more hands raised. Sridevi.
I believe Vikram had gone up before me.
Oh, he did? Okay. Vikram,
Yes.
then.
Thank you. I'll keep it. I know we are at 7:33. From a mental health perspective, absolutely. I have a few coaches in the Gen Z area, and all of them said that they are prone to comparisons on the internet. They are on Instagram, they're on Facebook, and I mean they're not living their life. They are living the internet life, and that forces them to compare themselves, and that is where the trigger for mental health happens. And that's what my experience has been. I don't intend to typecast, but from my coaching with the Gen Zers, I've seen that's a strong trend.
Sure. No, that's a fair point, Vikram. And this is where the context kind of overlays with the young, right? And that's where you can now confidently say it's for the Gen Z, because 20 years ago, there was no social media, right? And there was no opportunity for us to get that kind of feedback. Today, that does exist. Just a couple of days back, there was this report about Vivek Murthy, the US Surgeon General, saying that social media has to come with a warning label, like we have in tobacco products and alcohol products, saying that this is harmful for your mental health. Right, which is unheard of, right? Because some of this technology has not creeped in; it has kind of very quickly become a part of our lives, and we haven't really, questioned it enough. Of course, there are lots of positives to it, but also the point that you're making, which is the social comparison that happens. It can be harmful, especially for youngsters. Thanks, Vikram. Sridevi, you want to go next?
Yes, there was something coming up for me which I found strange, but anyway, I thought I must express is this. I'm thinking that the Gen X and Gen Y somewhere, or the millennials, somewhere we do carry the DNA and the traits of the fact that we were all colonized at some point in time. We've all lived in families where we've heard stories of colonialization. Therefore, things like dressing, decor, discipline were of primary importance to us in the workplaces. And now when I'm looking at the expressions here, things like no dress code, personalized workspaces, flexible work options, etc., I do see that the generation is very authentic with their expression, also because they are far away from the kind of history that we witness today. Those are just stories in the book of history. I really don't know. Like, I've had a grandfather who's probably, was from the pre-independence days, and many of us here. So when you are part of the X and Y, you still have traits of that. And when you become Z, and then when you move on to Alpha, this is like how we speak about the BC or the 1800s. And therefore, their powers of expression, I feel, is a lot more forceful and a lot more authentic. And I think for the first time, thank you so much, Subramanian, I'm looking at it in a very different light. Earlier it was more about the quote from Socrates. I think the senior generation is always disgruntled. But today, this is what came up for me, and I'm just putting it out here.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks. Thanks, Sridevi. Thank you so much for that. I see one more hand raised. Goldie, yes, you have a point to make.
I just wanted to take on the thread of what Barinder said, and how spirituality or the elderly find their happiness within something that that is very unique. This is very interesting because the idea of intergenerational facilities, I don't know if you're familiar with that, has been a big rise this year, especially in the UK, which is something that especially all of us here who are predominantly of Indian origin are familiar with, living with our grandparents or growing up in joint family units. And that's something very important to highlight, which has changed a lot in the last 15 years or so, where urbanization has taken us to more nuclear families. But ironically, in the UK, what they've discovered is they're taking nurseries and old age homes and merging them together to combine like younger members of the the society with the elderly, and bringing that component of happiness one to the other, so one lens to the other, to add that quotient of happiness. And this is something that I literally just read about this a few months ago, and I think it was very relevant to what Barinder was saying. So I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing that. And again, it's about how do you bring the best of both those worlds together, and how can they learn from each other. I think that's the larger point that you're also talking about here. So thanks for that. I think Shamik had asked a question which I'll quickly address and then move on. Yes, not too many organizations, Shamik. I think that's a very, very valid point. RPG, I know for a fact, does a lot of work because I have interacted with them and I have worked with them in the past. So I know that when the founder is curious about some of these things and you pay the money to go and do this kind of research and then publish the research out there, is it enough is a big question, of course. But then I think at least getting into this, helping us have some of these conversations in itself is a big deal. So yes, I think there is one other trend that, again, I'm not sure if a lot of us here on this call have noticed, is that Indian organizations, I mean, Indian founder-led organizations used to be fairly conservative about many of these things, let's say 15, 20 years ago. That's not the case anymore. Very, very savvy, right? Founder-led organizations know exactly what they're doing, and they go and do research like this, for instance, right? Which is amazing, which you don't see. Multinational organizations used to lead a lot of that research. Today, we see Indian organizations also doing a lot of this, which I think is fantastic, right? So that's a shift that I have seen, but probably not enough. I think there is a lot more that can be done across some of this as well. And I mean, across organizations, not for a particular company. I want to shift focus. I'm also cognizant of time, so I'm going to go through this quickly. There is this research. Does anybody know who this is before I make the point? Any ideas? Put it in the chat. Feel free to unmute and say.
She won the Nobel Prize for Economics?
Yes. What's her name?
I'm blanking out on the name. Claudia, something with C.
Yes. Claudia Golden. Thanks, Meenakshi. I did mention her briefly as I was kicking off. Claudia Golden, fascinating research. If you haven't read her work, please go and read. I mean, it is absolutely fascinating. She has her primary focus, among other things, but the one that she won the Nobel Prize was the labor participation of women in the workplace and how that affects economic policies and decisions. That was the focus of her work. Again, this, as I was reading through this last year, there are some very interesting points here that I wanted to share with this group, which is that part of the reasons why there's a gender gap at the workplace is because educational decisions, right, which impact a lifetime of all career opportunities, are made at a relatively young age. And often for young women, these are informed by experiences of previous generations, which is their parents and their grandparents, what did they do? And that kind of follows. But here is a wrinkle in that, right, which says that she makes this point from her research, which says that this may be shifting. With the current generation, with the youngsters that we see today, they may not be holding back as much as previous generations used to. And a lot of this is personal for us. I know my mom, for instance, held back, right, because she was tied by traditions, for instance. Not the case with my sister, right? So she wants a lot more opportunities, or with my friends, for that matter. So we see that, we see some of this, and it's backed by data, and she's done the research. And there are a couple of very powerful images which kind of show this, and I'm just going to flash it on the screen for the next couple of seconds for all of us to see. So this is one, right? And before I show this, the background is that these images that you see are basically a visual representation of the findings from Claudia Golden's research. So instead of showing you 5 tables, I'm going to show you a couple of images which kind of capture what she found through her research. So here is one. Very, very interesting and very powerful, right, as far as I'm concerned. You see the man and the woman going together until, the baby comes along, and then, everything changes, right, for the woman, especially. So this is one, right? And this is, again, from her research, and it's a visual representation of what the finding was. And this, which is, again, very powerful, the influence of prior generations. The reason I'm showing this is because there is, again, the intersectionality part of it, right? We're not talking about generations alone, but then when you superimpose the generational data with gender data, right? What does that show? So here is one more. Right, also very powerful. I had goosebumps when I saw this the first time. Right, the woman is looking back, previous generations. What is it that my mother or my grandmother was doing? And you see childbearing and child rearing was the primary responsibility. Maybe not anymore. You see youngsters going towards opportunities where they still have looking back through their shoulders, but they're not doing the same thing as their parents used to do. And there is this shift in society we see as a result of that, right? Which I think, again, this is from her research. I thought I'll just introduce this point to the group. Now, again, I'm shifting because a lot of these are connected. So the next point that I want to make here is that what happens when generations come together, right? And I think Goldie was making this point about, how can we learn better from each other, from different generations. This is not so much about the positives that can happen, but also the frictions that can emerge, especially when a young leader challenges somebody who's already been doing things in a certain way. And that can lead to friction between leadership transition. Again, many of us here work with succession planning, where you're guiding or coaching new leaders, right? But then they may be held back because things are done in a particular way in the organization, and they're challenging that. And when they do that, that leads to a lot of friction. And how do you overcome some of that? So if some of you have seen this this show called The Good Place, is very, very nice. So there are these two. I'm just going to give you a little bit of context before I play this video for you. There are these two characters, many characters, but these two main characters called Michael and Vicky. Michael is actually a demon. He's in this man's avatar, but he's actually a demon, and so is Vicky. And what Vicky does is she comes and she shares this very interesting new way of accomplishing or solving a particular problem, right? And she's just presented that. And what you see in this video is Michael's reaction to it, right? Everybody is wowed by what Vicky presented, but then here is how Michael reacts. I'm going to play this for you.
Why don't you go deeper into her file and look for other ways to challenge her?
Whoa. Slow down here. Vicky's example was fine. There was some good stuff there. But overall, C+. It was a C+, I'd say. There's some problems with it, some technical issues that only I can see and everything. So basically, it actually kind of stunk. So I think it's just best if you leave, Vicky. This is not working. You're bad at this. C+. Okay, goodbye.
Wow, same old Michael, just can't share the spotlight. Well, goodbye, everyone. That's a wrap on Vicky.
So any comments on what just happened? Any thoughts on what just happened? And any reactions? Do you want me to play it again?
Yes.
Play it again? Okay. Okay, once again, I'm going to play this so that you can...
Why don't you go...
so you can listen to it once again. Okay?
Why don't you go deeper into her file and look for other ways to challenge her?
Whoa. Slow down.
So Vicky has just made a presentation and she is, guiding the group. And Michael, who's been around for a long time, as you can see, he's much older. He comes and says something. Right? So here's what he says.
Vicky's example was fine. There was some good stuff there. But overall, C+. It was a C+, I'd say. There's some problems with it, some technical issues that only I can see and everything. So basically, it actually kind of stunk. So I think it's just best if you leave, Vicky. This is not working. You're bad at this. C+. Okay, goodbye.
Wow, same old Michael, just can't share the spotlight. Well, goodbye, everyone. That's a wrap on Vicky.
Okay, it's just a few seconds, that clip, but a lot of emotions, interactions, views. Any thoughts on what you just saw? Thanks, Shamik, for that. Head dancing, yeah, it's hilarious. Thanks, Meenakshi. So what just happened? What did you just see?
lot of discomfort and just not able to really, I mean, there's nothing to share, so you just kind of make up stories. Sorry, I could just relate to this one of this aspect which we keep talking about, managers giving feedback, very high level, you know. It's not there, but what is not there is not known. So yeah, just could look at that interplay that happens between feedback and here the entire discomfort that comes into play, and overplaying to your role, that before you really get into say no, don't do it because I've seen it and in my head it's clear.
Sure. Thanks, Jyoti. Yeah, I see it, you don't see it. What I say goes. Challenging status quo and authority is what Vikram says. Meenakshi, yes, please.
To me, this also goes back to what happens to women in the workplace. We rarely get specific feedback, actionable feedback. People give us feedback on very anecdotal feedback on how we came across. So it's not about our performance or our competence. It's about how we make others feel.
Sure.
That's what came up for me.
Thank you. Thanks, Meenakshi, for that. Like Shamik said, demons planning, right? Not being specific about what's really required. That was funny. Body language is, yeah, absolutely, Goldie. Thanks for sharing that. I mean, people know what's going on, right? You can sense their discomfort in their body language. Feeling of insecurity, biased and autocratic, not sensitive, older white male, being himself. Yeah. Any other perspectives? I like this this fact of insecurity that Sucharita mentioned. Any other points of view?
I think they are not used to being challenged. So when they get challenged, they feel insecure and they feel like, oh, do I not have the control anymore? And I think that puts them off. That's what I think from this video.
Yeah, absolutely. Insecure, feeling threatened, totally being territorial. Yeah, okay, fantastic. Thanks for playing along, everybody. There's also this deeper aspect, and of course, this might not have to do with the generation itself. I have to qualify. It could also be a demographic thing. But there is a young versus old dynamic happening here, right? So there is somebody like Vicky who's coming and challenging Michael's authority with giving a new idea, which everybody likes. And that you can see that from the body language, right? People are saying, what's wrong with Michael? Why is he? It's a great idea. And what happens after the scene is that those two ladies that you saw at the background, they go and challenge Vicky, they go and challenge Michael, saying, why did you do that? Right? Why did you say what you just said when you very well knew that Vicky's idea is great and we can actually go and implement it? Why didn't you, as a senior person, why didn't you encourage her? Why did you cut her down? And this is what he says, which is, I think, very.
There was some.
Why don't you go deeper?
Yeah, this is, so he's confronted, and this is what he says, which I think was very deep, right? Which is that he's a demon, so he's very senior, as you can see, and he's been doing this for hundreds of years. Right? They live forever. I mean, semantics aside, better way to torture humans, etc. Then proving the system was broke, right? Teaching the demons how to roll a rock up a hill over and over again. And this is the interesting part, right? It keep rolling it down. So Vicky comes along and says that, I have this great idea, this rock lifter thing, and she just lifts it up, right? She shares the great idea with everybody. And see what's written in bold there, which is that pushing the rock up the hill gave me a sense of purpose, gave me a sense of meaning. And now somebody else is, coming and challenging my role. Who am I if the rock is gone? Right. So this reaction of Michael is also coming from a deeper place. And that's also part of doing the work, right? As coaches, it's not just about one part of it, but how do we work with Michael, for example, right? And how do we make sure that he is working his way through this. He is kind of rationalizing what's going on around him. So this is the friction part of it, right? One is, of course, learning from different generations, but there will be friction. There will, of course, be friction when somebody comes and challenges or shares new ideas, and vice versa. It could also happen the other way around. It's also important to address this, right? Right. So this is one point that I wanted to leave this group with. Yeah, we just have about 8 minutes. So what I'm going to do is the last piece that I wanted to leave this group with is that I did this quick exercise of looking at the ICF competencies. Wait, before I go into that, let me see if there are any questions in the. Okay, so nothing. So before I do that, what I was trying to say was I did this mapping of ICF competencies with what you just saw, right? Which is that we have multiple generations at the workplace. We need to make sure that we avoid stereotypes. We also differentiate between demographics versus generations, versus context, versus intersectionality. So there are lots of complex elements of a lot of what we are doing. So therefore, what does it mean for all of us, right? What does it mean for us as coaches? So I superimpose some of what you just saw with the ICF competency. What does it mean? Right? And it's actually fairly straightforward. When I went through the competencies through this lens, I realized that there is something that all of us need to do, and here is what it is, right? So if you look at the competencies which you see on the left hand side, a lot of this, and I'm going to leave this on the slide for a second for you to read through, and then maybe I'll comment on some of these, and you can also comment with your points of view. So let me move on to the next set. These are the remaining 6, of course. And as you read through these, you will realize that there's a clear trend that emerges in terms of what we need to do as coaches. And I think this is the point that Vishy was also kind of trying to reinforce, right? Which is coming back now. Sorry. Right. So you can see a clear trend. I think the trend that I saw after I put this together was that 2 things. One is that build better awareness of what biases we may be carrying with us as coaches. So important. Secondly, make sure that we aren't pigeonholing, to use Vishy's word, not pigeonholing, stereotyping through some of these conversations, and even during the contracting stage, right? We're not doing that. I think it's extremely important. And the third piece is clarifying. We may, again, you've seen some data today, you've seen some research today, but does it really hold true in the context of the person or the group that you're working with? It's so important to clarify and kind of let that come from the person, instead of going in with your assumption and then coaching for something that may not be actually true for that other person, right? So it's so very important. So these are the 3 things that kind of emerged for me as I did this exercise of putting these superimposed views together, which I hope is useful for all of us here today. Right, so I just wanted to leave this group with this last piece of information. We just have 4 minutes left. I think we are doing good on time. If there are any closing comments or questions, happy to take them as well. The client has generational bias. Oh my God, that's such an important point that that Jyoti makes. Absolutely. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Goldie, yes, you have a point.
I completely resonate with the client having generational bias, because most of my clients are a lot younger than me, and it comes through only if you make them feel like you have that bias. So it's important to see them on par. And for a long time, it was so weird, but I felt that my coaching with the younger lot was a little bit more instructional, but I feel that's such a huge misconception. You really just have to go by the competencies. And I'm so glad that you brought them up, because it just, reinforces everything that we have been sort of, rattling on in our minds as coaches. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, Goldie. Great. Any other questions? Thanks, everybody. Thanks for your messages. Okay. If not, I guess we can wrap it up. Shanti?
Yeah, Subbu, thank you. I'm looking forward to seeing an updated version of the competencies with the newer version of the 8 competencies. I look forward to that slide. Very interesting in terms of how you've done. Brilliant session. You can see that in the chat. It's overflowing with gratitude and thanks and lovely messages for you. Soak it in. Thanks, everyone. I have put in the chat the link for the next session. Please do register. We look forward to having all of you back again. Until then, thank you. We will share the recording shortly.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Shanti.
Thank you.
Thank you, Subbu. Thanks.
Thanks,
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Subbu.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
That's a special one, Subbu. We've never had this at the end of a session, so brilliant.
Thanks, Shanti. Thanks, everybody.
And I can say that even, in the facilitators meet, Subbu created the same magic with some other topic. So brilliant.
Thank you.
Lovely.
Kind of you.
Lovely. Thanks, everyone. See you all soon.
Thanks. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Good night. Bye.